The first time Ethan Cross heard the alien queen's heart stop, it sounded less like death and more like a machine realizing it had been abandoned. The escape pod had split open across Bay 12 like a cracked silver seed, hissing steam into the freezing air, its hull still glowing faint orange at the seams. The whole repair hangar smelled like scorched metal, coolant, and the bitter electrical bite of ozone. Red emergency lights turned everything the color of old blood, washing over tool carts, fuel lines, and the long black streak the pod had carved across the concrete floor. Ethan was only there because third shift always got the broken things nobody else wanted. He was a systems mechanic, 32, 6'1" in steel-toe boots, with tired blue eyes and grease ground into the lines of his hands, and 10 minutes ago his biggest problem had been a fried pressure relay in the south wall. Then he heard the impact. Then he saw the seal markings on the pod. Then he saw her. She was taller than any human woman he had ever seen, even half-curled inside the wreckage, her skin a deep, luminous blue beneath the flashing lights, her silver-black armor split at the shoulder and collarbone where the pod restraints had burned through it. She looked impossible down there, like royalty fallen out of the sky and dropped into a maintenance bay that smelled like motor oil and cheap coffee. Ethan didn't know her name yet. He didn't know that half the sector had spent years whispering it with fear. All he knew was that the med scanner on his wrist was screaming in silent yellow warnings, and the life signs inside her chest were dropping too fast. Her eyes opened when he knelt beside her. They were bright, sharp, and steady in a way that made him feel seen all the way through. "Do not touch me, human," she said, her voice low and cold and somehow perfectly clear through the steam. Ethan glanced at the scanner again. "That's gonna be a problem." He reached for the emergency med case mounted on the wall beside the bay doors, popped it open, and ran the injector over her arm. The display flickered. Tissue stress. Internal trauma. Severe circulatory collapse. No compatible plasma in station inventory. He stared at the line twice, waiting for it to become better news. It didn't. The Queen's breathing shortened. Not panicked. Not weak. Controlled. Like even now she refused to let pain have the dignity of being seen. "Leave me," she said. "If recovery teams find me here, you will die first." Ethan let out one quiet breath through his nose. "Yeah," he said, already snapping tubing out of the kit. "Maybe." Her gaze sharpened when she understood what he was doing. "Stop. Can't. You do not know what my blood will do to you." He slid onto one knee in the freezing spill of light from the broken pod, wrapped the pressure band around his arm, and held the line steady with practiced hands that suddenly didn't feel steady at all. The scanner had flagged a wild possibility, buried deep in outdated xenomedical data no one trusted enough to use. Human blood. Temporary compatibility. Low odds. High risk. No backup plan. Above them, somewhere in the dark bones of the station, warning klaxons began to pulse in slow, heavy beats. Ethan looked at her one last time. She was trying to sit straighter, even now, like a queen could still command her own ending. "Then I guess," he said softly, as the first crimson line entered the silver-blue vein beneath her skin, "we find out together." Queen Sarilith Vera came back to consciousness one breath at a time, like someone climbing out of black water with a crown still on her head. The med scanner in Ethan's hand gave a soft green pulse, then another, then settled into a rhythm that did not make sense. Her heart was beating again, but not cleanly. It was catching, adjusting, searching, as if it had woken in a body that no longer fully belonged to itself. Frost-white vapor drifted from the torn seams of the escape pod. Somewhere overhead, a damaged vent rattled against the ductwork in a loose metal rhythm. The station lights flickered once, then steadied. Ethan stayed on one knee beside her, one hand still holding the line in place, the other pressed flat against the cold concrete to keep himself upright. He could feel his own pulse in his fingertips. Too fast. Too loud. Too human. Her eyes opened without warning. Bright silver at the center. Sharp enough to make him forget the freezing air in his lungs. For half a second she did not move. She only looked. At him, then at the narrow tube between them, then at the dark red moving through it. The silence changed. It tightened. "What have you done?" she asked, and this time her voice was quieter, which somehow made it more dangerous. Ethan swallowed. "Kept you alive, I hope." Her gaze dropped to his arm. Then to the monitor. Then back to his face. Whatever pain she was in, she held it the way a soldier holds a line, without display and without apology. She lifted one hand, slow but steady, and closed her fingers around his wrist. Her skin was cool. Not freezing. Just cool in a way that felt precise, almost engineered. "Disconnected," she said. "Not yet." That was not a request. Ethan let out a tired breath that almost turned into a laugh. "Yeah. I figured that out." She pushed herself higher against the fractured edge of the pod, every movement measured, every breath shallower than she wanted him to notice. Then the scanner chirped. A new line flashed across the screen in a burst of yellow text. "Cardiac resonance detected. Subject rhythm synchronization at 12%. Ethan frowned at it. "That is new," he murmured. "Read it," she said. He hesitated. "Looks like your heart is adjusting to the transfusion." "That is not what you are not saying." Ethan looked at the display again, hoping he had read it wrong. He had not. The tiny graph in the corner showed two waveforms instead of one. One belonged to her. One belonged to him. They were not matching, not exactly, but every third beat they bent toward each other, like two signals trying to become one pattern. He felt something strange then, not pain, not dizziness, just a sudden pressure behind his ribs, a heavy thump that did not land in the usual place. Saralitha's expression changed at the exact same moment. Not fear. Not confusion. Recognition. Her fingers tightened once on his wrist. "You felt that," she said. It was not a question. Ethan stared at her. "Yeah." The red lights over the bay doors shifted to amber. Somewhere down the corridor, a security lock disengaged with a low mechanical clunk. Station systems were waking up around them. Recovery teams, patrol drones, maybe worse. Ethan pulled the line free and sealed the injector port with shaking fingers. "Can you stand?" Her chin lifted an inch, royal. Even half broken. "I can do what is required." He believed her immediately, which was the problem. The next wave hit before either of them moved. A hard, uneven pulse knocked through his chest, and Saralitha's hand flew to the center of hers at the same instant. They froze there in the cold red light, human mechanic and alien queen, both listening to a rhythm that no longer belonged to only one body. Then she looked at him with something colder than anger and far more honest. "If your species has done this to me on purpose," she said, "there will be consequences." Ethan rose unsteadily to his feet and offered her a hand she clearly did not want to take. "Lady, I fix station plumbing," he said. "I do not think anybody put me in charge of rewriting alien biology." For the first time since she opened her eyes, the corner of her mouth shifted. Not a smile. Something smaller. More dangerous. More alive. Then the hallway beyond Bay 12 lit up with approaching footsteps, and the scanner in Ethan's hand flashed a new warning across the screen. Shared instability increasing. The footsteps outside Bay 12 were not running, which made them worse. Running meant panic. Running meant confusion. These were measured, disciplined, official. Ethan killed the scanner light with his thumb and glanced toward the narrow service corridor behind the damaged lift platform. It was barely wide enough for one maintenance cart, half blocked by old conduit and a stack of discarded coolant canisters, but it led somewhere quieter than here. "We need to move," he said. Queen Saralith Vera had already pushed herself fully upright against the split shell of the pod. The amber light turned the edges of her armor to dull bronze, and for a second she looked less like someone who had nearly died and more like someone trying to remember why the room had ever thought it could contain her. Then she took one step forward and the world reminded both of them that survival was not the same thing as recovery. Her hand caught the rim of the pod. His chest tightened at the exact instant her breath hitched. The sensation was fast, intimate, and deeply wrong, like hearing an echo inside his own bones. Ethan frowned and pressed his palm to the center of his sternum. That is getting real old real fast. Sarilith straightened before he could offer help she would reject. Then keep up, human. He almost said something back, but the door at the far end of the bay released with a pneumatic hiss, and a shaft of white security light cut across the red gloom. Ethan moved first, not because he was braver, but because he knew the station. He slipped under the bent rail beside the lift assembly and pulled aside a hanging thermal blanket that concealed the service passage. The metal behind it breathed out 10 degrees colder than the bay. Sarilith followed without a word, though every step looked chosen rather than given. The passage narrowed immediately, forcing them shoulder to shoulder with old pipes that ticked and shuddered with recycled heat. Overhead, emergency cables sagged low enough to brush Ethan's hair. The air smelled like dust, cold steel, and stagnant water trapped somewhere deep in the walls. Behind them, voices entered the bay. Human voices. Station security. One woman said, pod impact confirmed. Another answered, no survivor signatures in the open scan. Ethan kept moving. They will find the blood trace, Sarilith said quietly. Eventually. Good news is eventually takes time. That is not good news. It is all I have right now. He could feel her looking at him, though the corridor was too dark to read her expression clearly. Up close, her presence changed the air. Not softer. More precise. Like standing too near a live circuit and realizing the hum in the walls had a mind behind it. Another pulse hit him then, stronger this time. His vision blurred for half a second with a sensation that was not his own, bright light, polished stone, voices layered in a language older than any sound he knew. It vanished as quickly as it came, leaving him gripping a pipe for balance. Sarilith stopped 3 feet ahead. What did you see? She asked. Ethan blinked hard. I was hoping you were going to tell me. She turned toward him fully now, silver eyes narrowed in the dark. Describe it. He hesitated, not because he did not want to answer, but because the memory did not feel borrowed. It felt placed. A room, he said. Tall walls. White stone, maybe. A lot of voices. You were there. Her face did not change much, but her silence did. It deepened. That chamber is not in your world, she said. No kidding. She studied him another second, then looked away first, which told Ethan more than any confession would have. They resumed walking. The corridor opened into an older maintenance junction lined with dead monitors and rusting access ladders. In the center stood a sealed terminal half buried beneath dust and insulation foam, its power indicator still faintly blue. Ethan wiped the screen with his sleeve and brought it to life. Station maps bloomed across the cracked glass. He scanned downward, toward the decommissioned lower levels under the reactor wing. No patrols. No active cameras. No authorized traffic for 12 years. Perfect. Beside him, Sarilith grew still in that unnatural, listening way she had. Someone is searching specifically for me now, she said. Ethan glanced at her. How can you tell? She lifted one hand to the side of her neck, where a thin band of silver beneath her skin gave off a dim, cold shimmer. Because the Crown network has begun to call. Ethan looked back at the map. And that is bad. That depends, she said, voice lowering into something flatter than fear. On whether the ones answering still serve their queen. Then the terminal screen flickered, overlaid by a burst of encrypted symbols Ethan could not read, and Sarilith's reflection in the cracked glass went perfectly still as she whispered, almost to herself, no. Not rescue. Her eyes lifted to meet his. They are coming to erase me. The lower levels of the station had been shut down so long ago that even the air felt retired. Ethan led the way down a grated staircase that shivered beneath their weight, then through a bulkhead warped at one corner where old heat damage had bent the frame. Beyond it, the world changed. The bright emergency glare from the upper decks gave way to a dim blue half-light cast by forgotten maintenance strips buried in the walls, just enough to reveal rusted valve wheels, sealed access panels, and pipes thick as tree trunks running the length of the corridor. The temperature dropped hard, somewhere near 50 degrees, and every breath carried the mineral smell of old condensation and machine dust. Somewhere far below, pumps moved with a slow buried thud, like the station had a second heart hidden under steel and concrete. Saralith said nothing for the first 60 yards. Ethan could hear her steps behind him. Controlled, steady, lighter than he expected for someone wearing ceremonial armor and carrying herself like a living monument. He was tired enough now that every rung, every sealed hatch, every turn through the decommissioned corridor felt a little unreal. The blood loss had not hit him all at once. It had arrived in layers. A slight tremor in his hands. A hollow pressure behind the eyes. A floating lightness in his knees that made each step feel 1 inch farther from the floor than it should have been. He did not mention it. He figured if an alien queen could walk through a station on the edge of collapse without complaint, the least he could do was not pass out dramatically in front of her. This section was mothballed after a coolant fire 12 years ago, he said, more to keep his own mind awake than because she had asked. Nobody comes down here unless they are very lost or very unlucky. And which are we? Saralith asked from behind him, lost or unlucky? Ethan pushed open a service hatch and glanced back at her. In the colder light, her skin had lost some of that near-luminous glow from the bay, but it made her look no less striking. If anything, the shadows sharpened the high lines of her face and the metallic threads woven through the dark fall of her hair. I am leaning toward creative problem-solving, he said. Her eyes held his for half a second, unreadable, and then she stepped through the hatch after him. The room beyond had once been a reactor support control chamber. Now it was little more than a concrete box wrapped in dead screens and silent consoles, with an old repair cot bolted to one wall and storage cabinets lining the other. A portable heater, probably abandoned by some technician years ago, sat in the corner under a layer of dust. Ethan crossed to it, popped the side panel, and frowned at the dead battery cell. Of course, he muttered. He crouched beside it, dug through a bin of salvaged parts, and began stripping a live connector from an old diagnostic terminal. Behind him, Saralith stood perfectly still in the center of the room, taking it in with the kind of gaze rulers probably used on battlefields and courtrooms and people foolish enough to lie to them. This is where you choose to hide your queen, she asked. Ethan did not look up. This is where I choose to hide somebody people are trying to erase. The room went quiet after that. Not empty. Just quiet in a new way. The kind that came after a truth landed and neither person was ready to touch it again. Ethan finally got the heater running. It coughed once, rattled, then began spilling out weak but real warmth, enough to soften the chill along the floor. He stood and turned toward her with the med kit he had managed to keep from Bay 12. You need to sit down. I do not. Your heart disagrees. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Saralitha's expression changed, not offended exactly, but sharper, as if he had stepped too near a private door. Ethan regretted it for half a second, right until a hard pulse moved through his chest and he saw the same pressure flicker across her face at the exact same moment. They both felt it. Neither could pretend otherwise now. He exhaled slowly and set the kid on the cot. Sit, he said, gentler this time. Please. For a moment he thought she would refuse simply because the request came from him. Then, with all the ceremony of a queen accepting terms she disliked, she lowered herself onto the edge of the narrow cot. The steel frame looked insultingly small beneath her. Ethan knelt in front of her to check the damaged seal at her shoulder armor, careful, methodical, doing his best to act like the distance between them did not suddenly feel charged with too much awareness. Up close, he could see where the silver circuitry under her skin dimmed and brightened with each measured breath. Not decorative, he realized. Biological. Living. Your people made elegance look inconvenient, he said quietly, mostly to fill the silence. Your people, she replied, hide emergency blankets behind broken freight lifts and call that civilization. Ethan huffed a laugh before he could help it. To his surprise, something in her gaze softened by a fraction, just enough to let him see the woman beneath the crown, the exhaustion beneath the steel. Then the old terminal on the wall gave a sudden burst of static, and a single encrypted line flashed across the dead screen in a language he could not read. Saralith looked at it once and went completely still. What does that say? Ethan asked. Her voice, when it came, was very calm. Too calm. It says my empire has already decided I am worth more dead than found beside you. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The old control chamber settled around them with the slow metallic sounds of a place that had outlived its purpose, the heater clicking in uneven bursts, the pipes inside the walls answering with low hollow knocks. Blue light from the dead consoles washed across the floor in thin strips, making the dust look almost silver where it drifted through the stale air. Ethan stayed kneeling beside the cot longer than he needed to, one hand resting against the open med kit, the other braced on his thigh because standing too fast felt like a gamble he might lose. Across from him, Saralith sat with her spine straight despite the narrow mattress and the ugly human room and the fact that her own empire had just reduced her life to a line of encrypted text. She did not look shattered. She looked quieter than that. More dangerous. Like something inside her had not broken, only gone still. Ethan finally peeled back the damaged edge of her shoulder armor and set the cracked panel aside. Underneath, the fabric layer beneath it had fused in places against the protective mesh, and beneath that a pattern of pale silver channels traced the line of her collarbone and vanished under the curve of her neck. Living circuitry, he thought again, but that was too simple a phrase for what he was seeing. It was finer than circuitry. Too organic to be machine, too deliberate to be random. Does it hurt? He asked. Saralith watched him in silence for a second. Would the answer alter what you do next? Maybe the part where I try not to make it worse. That earned him the smallest shift in her expression, not amusement exactly, but the faintest acknowledgement that he was still speaking to her like a person rather than an artifact. Yes, she said at last. It hurts. Ethan nodded once, careful not to react too strongly, and reached for the sterile sealant. He worked with the slow concentration of a man who had learned long ago that the best way to keep fear from spreading was to give his hands a job. Outside the chamber, nothing moved. No footsteps. No alarms. Only the station breathing through old steel lungs. The silence lasted so long it began to feel shared. Not empty. Shared. Ethan sealed a split seam near her shoulder and checked the scanner again. The resonance warning had not gone away. If anything, it had grown more stable, which somehow made it worse. Stable meant real. Stable meant this was not a side effect that would politely disappear once the crisis ended. He sat back on his heels and rubbed a hand over his face. You know, he said, his voice quieter now, back home, when people say they have had a rough day, they usually mean a delayed train or bad coffee. Your species places great emotional weight on beverages, Saralith said. Ethan looked up at her, caught off guard. Was that a joke? Do humans require formal notice before one occurs? He let out a tired laugh, low and brief, and the sound changed the room. It took some of the iron out of it. Some of the distance. Saralith watched him as if that mattered more than she expected. The heater clicked again. The warmth had finally begun to reach the cot, and with it came the smell of heated dust and old wiring. Ethan leaned back against a cabinet and stretched his legs out on the cold floor. He was not planning to stay there. His body simply made the decision before he did. For a minute he closed his eyes. Behind them came a sudden image that was not memory and not dream. Rain on a window. Soft gray daylight. A child-sized version of himself sitting in a hospital chair with a paper cup in both hands while machines breathed softly in the background. He opened his eyes immediately. Saralith was already looking at him. "That was yours," she said. Ethan swallowed. "Yeah." Her voice lowered. "Who were you waiting for?" He stared at the rust line on the far wall for a second before answering. "My mother. She worked double shifts when I was a kid. Sometimes she got sick and still tried to act like she was not." He exhaled once through his nose. "I learned early that people hate being seen as weak almost as much as they hate being left alone." Saralitha's gaze did not leave him. For the first time. Since he had found her in Bay 12, there was no command in it. No warning. Only attention. Careful and strange and almost reluctant. "Is that why you stayed?" she asked, "because you recognized the shape of pride?" Ethan looked at her then, really looked, at the Queen sitting in a forgotten room beneath a station that was no longer safe, carrying herself with all the dignity of a throne no one else in the galaxy seemed willing to honor. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe I just do not like the idea of anybody dying alone in a metal box." Something moved through the bond then, softer than pain, quieter than fear. Not an image this time. A feeling. Vast rooms. Heavy silence. The weight of being watched by millions and known by none of them. Ethan did not need a translator for loneliness. Saralith lowered her eyes first. "On my world," she said carefully, "a queen is never alone." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was almost too soft for the room. "That is not the same as being accompanied." Ethan did not answer right away. He was too tired for cleverness, and something in her tone deserved better than a joke. So he only reached beside him, took the last unopened bottle from the med kit, and set it within her reach instead of his own. Saralith looked at the bottle, then at him, and the silence that followed was warmer than the heater had managed all night. Then the terminal on the wall lit without warning, and both of their hearts kicked hard at the same instant as a new message burned across the screen in cold white letters. "Tracking lock confirmed." The words on the terminal stayed there long enough to become part of the room. "Tracking lock confirmed." White letters. No sound. No alarm. Somehow that made them feel colder. Ethan was on his feet before he fully remembered deciding to stand, one hand braced against the cabinet until the room stopped tilting. The heater clicked behind him. The pipes in the walls answered with their deep mechanical knock. Everything else went still. Saralith rose from the cot in one smooth motion that hid the cost of it almost perfectly, though the bond told on her before her face did. A sharp pull under his ribs. A brief pressure in his chest. She was hurting again and refusing to name it. Ethan crossed to the terminal and wiped the dust from the lower panel with the edge of his sleeve. The message had no source header, no route stamp, nothing a station system should have needed. "That did not come through local infrastructure," Saralith said. Her voice was quiet now, all frost and precision. "It came through the crown lattice." Ethan glanced back at her. "Meaning?" "Meaning whoever sent it did not search this station. They searched me." He stared at the screen another second, then pulled up the maintenance overlay and began tracing signal paths through dead sectors and disabled repeaters. His hands moved on habit even while his mind tried to catch up. The lower decks were supposed to be blind. No active cameras. No drone traffic. No live security grid. If they had a tracking lock anyway, then the signal was not coming from the station. It was coming from her. Or from him. Or from whatever impossible thing the transfusion had built between them. "Can you shut it off?" he asked. Saralith did not answer immediately. Ethan turned and found her standing in the blue half-light with one hand at the side of her neck, fingers pressed against the thin silver band beneath the skin there. The faint shimmer he had noticed before was brighter now, pulsing in a rhythm too close to the one hammering in his own chest. "Not from here," she said at last. The lattice was designed so a queen could never truly vanish. It was called protection. Her mouth shifted, not bitter, not quite. Empires enjoy giving beautiful names to cages. Ethan leaned against the terminal and studied her. "So your own people can follow you anywhere." "My own people," she said, "are not the ones I am worried about." That made him straighten. "You said they were coming to erase you." "Yes." Her silver eyes lifted to his. "But a queen marked by foreign resonance is worth more than silence now. She is evidence." Ethan felt the meaning land in stages. Not rescue. Not recovery. Exposure. The impossible bond between a human mechanic and an alien queen was no longer just personal, or biological, or strange. It was political. It could be measured. Used. Turned into doctrine by people who had never bled for it. The thought put a chill in him. Deeper than the room. He looked down at the scanner still clipped to his belt and woke the display. 2 cardiac waveforms answered immediately. Hers. His. Still bending toward each other every few beats like they had not gotten the memo that this was a bad idea. "You knew something like this could happen," he said. Saralitha's silence was answer enough before she even spoke. "I knew royal blood carries old architecture," she said. "Emergency adaptive systems. Rare pair bonding responses in near-death states. Stories old enough to be dismissed as ceremonial myth by people who had never been desperate enough to test them." Ethan let out a low breath. "You left out the part where the myth drags a maintenance guy into imperial problems." "At the time," she said, "I was occupied with dying." He gave her a look. "Fair." For one brief second, that almost smile returned to the corner of her mouth. Small. Tired. Dangerous in the way dawn is dangerous when you have spent too long in the dark. Then it vanished, replaced by something more honest. "Why are you still here, Ethan Cross?" He blinked once. "I thought we covered that." "No," her gaze held him steady. "You explained your actions. You did not answer the question." The room narrowed around the silence between them. The heater rattled softly. Somewhere beyond the wall, old water shifted through a pipe with a sound like distant rain. Ethan looked down at his hands, at the grease still trapped in the creases, at the faint dried blood beneath the tape on his arm. He could have lied. Could have said duty. Could have said there was nowhere else to go. But the bond had made false things feel flimsy. "Because every time I think about leaving," he said slowly, "it feels wrong in a place I cannot explain." Saralith watched him without moving. He pressed on before common sense could interrupt. "And because I think you are used to people obeying your title, not seeing you when it costs them something." The word settled between them, too direct to take back. Her breathing changed first. Barely. Then the pulse under his ribs answered, softer than the earlier surges, but deeper. Not pain. Not fear. Recognition. Saralith looked away before he could name what he saw in her face. "That," she said quietly, "is precisely why this bond is dangerous." Ethan frowned. "Because it is real?" Her eyes returned to his, bright as forged metal in the blue light. "Because for the first time in my life, I do not know whether my heart is reacting to survival," she said, "or to you." Before he could answer, the terminal emitted a low tone and the maintenance map on the screen bloomed red across 3 adjoining corridors. Multiple entries. Converging. Slow. Deliberate. Ethan stepped to the panel and felt his own pulse lurch. Saralith had already moved beside him. On the screen, the route lines narrowed like closing fingers around the forgotten room. And then, one after another, every dead monitor in the chamber flickered awake. Every dead monitor in the chamber came alive in stages, not with station diagnostics or maintenance menus, but with the same cold white crest spreading across the glass like frost finding a window. Ethan had never seen the royal insignia of the Varen Empire before, but he knew power when it entered a room and expected everything inside it to lower its eyes. The cracked screens brightened one by one, throwing pale light across the concrete walls, across the heater, across Saralitha's face until she looked less hidden and more summoned. Then a voice filled the chamber. Female. Calm. Refined enough to sound almost gentle. Your Majesty, it said, remain where you are. Ethan's shoulders went tight. Saralith did not move. That is not a rescue channel, she said quietly. No, the voice replied. It is not. A figure resolved on the largest screen, first as static, then as a sharp, elegant face framed in silver ceremonial armor. Another blue-skinned woman, older perhaps, though age was hard to read on alien features that carried themselves like polished stone. Her eyes were lighter than Saralitha's. Colder too. She inclined her head by exactly half an inch. Too formal to be warm. Too familiar to be harmless. High Chancellor Vale, Saralith said. There was no surprise in her tone, only confirmation. Ethan looked from the screen to the queen beside him. Friend of yours? No, Saralith said. That would imply affection. Vale's expression did not change, but something in her gaze sharpened as it settled on Ethan. The human remains with you. You say that, Ethan murmured, like I tracked mud across the carpet. Saralith almost turned toward him, almost. Vale ignored the comment entirely. Your Majesty, the situation is unstable. The Palace Council has authorized immediate containment. Ethan folded his arms loosely, more to keep his hands from shaking than from confidence. Containment is usually a bad word where I come from. Your language is imprecise, Vale said. Your survival is not the matter in question. That landed exactly how she intended. Ethan felt the bond tighten under his sternum as Saralitha's anger rose, controlled and cold. You will speak to him with respect, Saralith said. Vale's eyes returned to the queen. Respect has already cost us too much. The monitors behind her shifted, revealing layered data streams Ethan could not read, biometric arcs, resonance diagrams, and at the center of all of it two synchronized waveforms. His and hers. Seeing them on another screen did something ugly to his stomach. The bond had become evidence now. Catalogued. Classified. No longer private, no longer strange in the small human way of strange, but strategic. Vale spoke again. The lattice confirms a live adaptive convergence. Cross-species cardiac resonance. Neural mirroring patterns. Royal line entanglement. Her gaze cooled further. If this becomes public, it will not remain an anomaly. It will become doctrine, superstition, leverage, and eventually war. Ethan let out a slow breath. So your solution is what, exactly? Vale answered without hesitation. Separation. The word hung in the room like a blade that had not yet decided where to fall. Ethan did not ask what separation meant. He was not stupid. Beside him, Saralith stood straighter, and for the first time since Bay 12, Ethan did not see a wounded woman or a stranded queen. He saw rule. Not the crown, not the myth of it, but the thing itself. Authority held in bone and breath. You do not issue terms to me from behind glass, she said. Vale's expression remained carefully blank. I issue them from duty. No, Saralith said. From fear. Silence pressed against the chamber walls. Ethan could hear the faint hum of the old terminal, the whisper of warm air from the heater, the dry crackle of static behind Vale's image. The Chancellor's eyes moved once more to him. Human Ethan Cross, she said, and hearing his full name in that voice made the room feel smaller. Whatever compassion you imagine this to be, understand that you now stand inside an imperial mechanism older than your species' written law. If you remain beside her, you will not survive what follows. Ethan met her stare through the fractured screen and found, to his own surprise, that he was tired enough to be honest. That warning would carry more weight, he said, if leaving her had ever sounded easier than staying. Something changed in the bond immediately. A low, resonant warmth, not soft exactly, but open in a way Seralith had not allowed until now. He did not need to look to know she had felt it too. Vale did. Her gaze narrowed by a degree. You see, she said to Seralith, it is already deepening. Seralith stepped closer to the central monitor until her reflection nearly touched the Chancellor's image. Then hear me clearly, she said. He is under my protection. Vale's voice lost some of its smoothness then, revealing steel beneath ceremony. Your protection is the problem. At once the maintenance map on the side screen updated again, red route lines moving nearer through the lower corridors. Not troops rushing in. Something more disciplined than that. Controlled. Timed. Ethan stepped toward the panel and saw the source labels now, finally translated by the local system into rough station English. Crown Guard. 3 units. Direct vector. His pulse kicked once, hard enough that Seralitha's breath caught with it. Vale saw that too. This is your final opportunity, she said. Surrender the resonance host and the council may still preserve your throne. Ethan turned slowly. Resonance host, he repeated. That is what you call me. That is what you are. The room went so quiet Ethan could hear the tiny ticking sound of the old heater coils expanding under stress. Then Seralith made a sound he had not heard from her before. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just final. No, she said. Vale's face stilled. No. Seralith lifted her chin, silver eyes bright as forged metal in the monitor glow. I will not trade the man who saved my life to satisfy a council too cowardly to face what it fears. Ethan looked at her then, really looked, and something in his chest answered before he could stop it. Not fear. Not even relief. Something steadier. Chosen. Vale's image sharpened one last time. Then the council will proceed without your consent. The screens went black all at once. The heater clicked. The pipes knocked once in the walls. Then, from somewhere beyond the sealed bulkhead, came the heavy mechanical sound of the first lock disengaging. The first lock released with a deep iron clunk that traveled through the floor and into Ethan's shoes. The second came 3 seconds later. Deliberate. Measured. Whoever was on the other side of that bulkhead did not need noise to make themselves known. Ethan crossed to the side console and pulled up the old service schematics with hands that were steadier than he felt. The lower chamber had once connected to a coolant transfer shaft that ran under the reactor spine and emptied into an abandoned launch support bay 2 levels down. Most of it had been sealed after the fire, but not all of it. Old stations never really died. They just forgot how to admit they still had hidden ways through them. There is another route, he said. Narrow, cold, probably not up to code in any century, but it gets us out of this room. Seralith stepped beside him, close enough that he could feel the cool precision of her presence before he looked up. And after it gets us out. Ethan followed the schematic lines with one finger. A cargo elevator shaft. If the manual release still works, it drops into Bay 4. There is an emergency uplink there for outbound distress traffic. He glanced at her. You can call somebody who actually answers to you. Her silver eyes stayed on the screen a moment longer. There may be no one left who answers only to me. Another lock disengaged outside. The old heater rattled in protest, as if even it knew time had run thin. Ethan tapped the map and brought up the maintenance feed overlay. The red route markers had split now, 1 unit at the main corridor, 1 at the side access, 1 moving to cut off the lower shaft. They were not charging. They were containing. Hurting. They know this station better than they should, he said. No, Seralith replied. They know me better than they should. Ethan turned to her. That is not the same thing. For the first time, she looked at him as though the distinction had struck somewhere deeper than argument. The chamber light caught in the silver lattice beneath her skin, drawing thin lines of brightness along her throat and collarbone like moonlight trapped under glass. Then the bond moved again, not with pain this time, but with a sudden flood of something so clear he nearly lost his breath. A ceremonial hall vast enough to swallow sound. White stone pillars. Thousands kneeling. A young Seraph standing alone at the center, crowned in living metal while every face around her remained lowered. Not reverence. Distance. Isolation polished until it looked like honor. Ethan blinked hard and the vision vanished, but the feeling remained, cold and enormous and terribly familiar in its own way. He had known smaller versions of that loneliness all his life. Different rooms. Different clothes. Same silence. Seraph saw the recognition land in him. You keep seeing what I never offered, she said quietly. You keep feeling what I never meant to show. Her voice held no accusation. Only fatigue, and beneath it something rawer. Ethan looked down at the map again because it was easier than looking straight at what had just passed between them. Maybe your heart is bad at keeping secrets. It is not my heart alone anymore. That made him still. The words were soft. Matter of fact. More intimate than anything either of them had said. Outside, metal scraped against metal. The side hatch was being opened. Ethan shut down the terminal, grabbed the med kit, and crossed to the floor grate near the back wall. He dropped to one knee, jammed a maintenance wrench into the rusted latch, and leaned his weight into it. The grate resisted for one long second, then gave way with a sharp groan and a burst of trapped cold air. A shaft opened beneath them, black and narrow, with an old ladder vanishing into blue shadow. The smell rising from it was ancient steel, coolant residue, and the mineral bite of deep station damp. Ethan looked over his shoulder. Ladies first. Seraph did not move immediately. Her gaze was on him, unreadable in the dim light. You understand what the council is offering you, she said. A way out. It does not sound like much of one. If you step away now, Ethan Cross, I can still tell them the resonance is incomplete. Temporary. A side effect of trauma. He straightened slowly. Would that save you? Her silence was enough. He let out a breath. Then it is a bad offer. Another metallic impact sounded from the side hatch. Dust shook loose from the ceiling in a pale drift. Seraph's posture changed then, not into fear, but into decision. She stepped toward him until the space between them narrowed to almost nothing, close enough for him to see the fine shifting pattern in her irises, close enough to feel the shared rhythm between them settle into one impossible measure. On my world, she said, to choose one life over a throne is considered weakness. Ethan held her gaze. On mine, depends whose life it is. Something passed through the bond at that, warm and fierce and no longer willing to hide behind survival or biology or royal myth. Seraph lifted one hand, slow enough to give him every chance to step back. He did not. Her fingers rested lightly against the center of his chest, exactly where the strange shared pressure always lived now. Then hear me clearly, she said, her voice lower than the machinery around them, steadier than the locks outside. This is not instinct. It is not illness. It is not a mistake of blood. Ethan forgot the cold. Forgot the old station. Forgot, for one suspended second, that people were closing in from every corridor. Seraph, he said. Her eyes never left his. I know, she answered, as if he had said more than her name. Then the side hatch buckled inward with a hard metallic shriek, and every monitor in the chamber flashed white. Seraph's hand left his chest. Her expression became royal again, but not distant. Never that again. Chosen. Down, she said. Ethan grabbed the med kit, swung himself onto the ladder, and looked up just once as she followed. The chamber above them filled with cold light. The queen descended into the dark after him, and for the first time since Bay 12, Ethan understood the shape of the truth with terrifying clarity. He had not merely saved her life. Somewhere between his blood and her silence, she had chosen his. The ladder shook with every rung they took, not from age alone, but from the deep mechanical force of old systems waking in places that were supposed to stay dead. Ethan climbed first, one hand on the rail, the other dragging the med kit against his hip while cold air rose from below and wrapped around his arms like water. Above him, the hatch to the control chamber sealed again with a hard metallic slam, cutting off the white intrusion of the crown guard and leaving only darkness, the faint blue guide strips along the shaft, and the quiet sound of Queen Seralith Vera descending behind him with the steady grace of someone who refused to let fear touch her posture. The shaft opened one level down into a horizontal coolant access tunnel barely wide enough for both of them to stand side by side. The walls sweated with condensation. Ancient warning labels peeled from the steel in faded strips. Somewhere far ahead, a pressure valve released with a sigh that sounded almost human. Ethan dropped the last 4 feet to the tunnel floor and caught himself against the wall before the brief wave of dizziness could tilt him sideways. Seralith landed beside him a second later, lighter than he expected, though the bond carried the truth of the strain she hid. Not weakness. Cost. The difference mattered to him now. Bay 4 is 200 yards east, he said, checking the emergency map on his wrist display. Assuming the old route has not collapsed. You speak with surprising optimism for a man covered in dust and borrowed destiny, Seralith said. Ethan looked at her and managed a tired smile. I am from Ohio. Low expectations are how we survive. To his quiet surprise, she almost laughed. Not a courtly sound. Not royal. Just a brief fracture in the ice, warm enough to make the tunnel feel less empty. They moved quickly after that, boots ringing softly against the grated floor, shoulders brushing old pipework, breath clouding in the colder stretches where the station skin touched open space. The bond no longer came in shocks. It had settled into something stranger and calmer, a constant low awareness at the center of his chest, as if her presence now occupied a place inside him that had never been designed for solitude again. When they reached Bay 4, the room beyond the tunnel was vast and dark, a decommissioned launch support chamber lined with silent cranes, fuel racks, and one emergency communications spire still glowing faint green near the far wall. Ethan crossed to it, wiped frost from the controls, and forced the ancient console awake. The screen flickered, stalled, then opened a priority transmission channel with a tone sharp enough to split the silence. He stepped back. It is yours, he said. Seralith looked at the console, then at him, and for one suspended second Ethan understood that. Everything ahead of them could still turn. A queen could choose empire. A council could choose fear. A human mechanic could disappear into the footnotes of a crisis too large for his name. Then Seralith placed her hand on the console and spoke in her own language, low and clear and absolute. The chamber lights brightened all at once. The dead screens overhead awakened. Across them bloomed the seal of the Varen throne, not fractured this time, not filtered through a chancellor's control, but full and sovereign and unmistakable. When Seralith spoke again, the station itself seemed to listen. Ethan did not understand every word, but he understood enough. She was not surrendering. She was declaring. Her voice carried through the bay with the weight of law and the calm of someone who had finally stopped asking permission to be herself. By the time the translation band on the console caught up, the meaning was already written across every screen in plain station English. By decree of the living throne, the human Ethan Cross is under royal protection. Any action against him is treason against the crown. Ethan stared at the words while something deep and electric moved through the bond, not fear, not relief, but recognition so complete it nearly brought him to his knees. Seralith turned then, the glow of the awakened screens casting silver light through the dark strands of her hair and along the living lines beneath her skin. She no longer looked like someone hiding in the ruins of a broken station. She looked exactly what she was. A queen. But not the distant one from the visions. Not the untouchable figure raised above all company. This one had chosen. Footsteps sounded at the edge of the bay. Crown Guard at last, emerging from the service entrance in disciplined formation, weapons lowered not in defeat, but in uncertainty. They had expected a fugitive. They found their sovereign standing beside the man they had been ordered to erase. No one moved. No one spoke. The entire room held its breath on the edge of a law that had just been rewritten. Sarilith crossed the distance between them with measured steps and stopped close enough for Ethan to hear the calm strength in her breathing. Then, in front of her guard, her empire, and the silent machinery of a station that had witnessed everything, she placed her hand over the center of her chest. Ethan felt the answering beat inside his own ribs before he realized why. The monitors above them shifted from the throne seal to a medical overlay, and there, in pale blue lines for all of them to see, 2 heart rhythms moved across the screens. Separate. Distinct. Undeniably real. And then, slowly, beautifully, they aligned. No one in the bay made a sound. Sarilith lifted her gaze to his, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet enough that only he and the silence seemed meant to hear it. They taught me that power meant being above need, she said. You taught me that dignity can kneel beside suffering and remain dignity still. Ethan could not think of anything grand enough to answer that, so he did the only honest thing left. He stayed. Around them, the guard lowered their heads one by one. No order had been given. None was needed. Above the station, somewhere beyond steel and vacuum and the long machinery of empire,